So, Fabio, there's a lot of distrust in the medical establishment, which I think is leading to a lot of this distrust in medical science today in the wake of COVID 19. Is there a basis for this distrust?
Is there a basis? I think there is. The pharmaceutical industry is very new. You know, the pharmaceutical companies are born after the Industrial Revolution. Most companies were families of pharmacists or chemists that had a shop front and they were making concoctions and selling them. And then they got bigger and they got bigger and they kept making concoctions and selling them. There was very little control or standard or safety guidelines. It's only after the war that the pharmaceutical industry has become more regulated. If you think about it, one of the drug giants was Bayer, and Bayer made a lot of money from making heroin. This was used for cough, for putting children to sleep, for night terrors. There was a key incident that happened in the 60s. So thalidomide was a medicine that became very famous because it was the first medicine to be marketed for pregnant women specifically. And it was marketed to help with the nausea from pregnancy and also to help with sleep of pregnant women. It carried out devastating results to hundreds of thousands of women and children because it caused really terrible developmental defects. So many stillbirths were a result of thalidomide, but also hundreds of thousands of children with malformed arms and legs. The medicine was commercialized by pharmaceutical agents across the world as a miracle, like all cure thing. There was no regulation on what claims pharmaceutical companies could make or chemical companies could make on the virtues of their medicines. There was no agreed process on the safety monitoring and safety reporting of those medicines. And because thalidomide was such a strike, also at an emotional level, something that is so sacred as giving life, that really became a big issue. Incidentally, the FDA did not approve thalidomide for pregnant women. So the US actually doesn't have a lot of history around that. In Europe, there were a lot of, when I grew up, there were people in their 30s and 40s that you would see in the streets almost every day that had been victims of thalidomide. So that caused a big wave of change in the pharmaceutical industry. So that now, from that moment on, the requirement to conduct clinical trials that are report both efficacy and safety, independently reviewed by regulators, that the claims that any pharmaceutical company makes need to match the findings of the studies very strictly, so that nothing can be claimed to be safe.
And then you see these commercials where they have to list all the
Right.
side effects of their
Right.
drug, their miracle drug, which are
That's
very long lists.
Yes, which is like takes 2/3 of the commercial, right? That really changed the accountability of pharmaceutical manufacturers and the responsibility of pharmaceutical manufacturers on what and how they conduct their research. It also introduced the necessity to conduct preclinical studies. They're called about teratogenicity, so the possibility to affect the embryo. So that all drugs that are marketed today, they are directed to people that are fertile and don't require contraception. They have to go through these teratogenicity studies that cost a lot of money, and they last for at least 2 years. And that's why a lot of drugs that are approved today are not indicated for pregnant women or for people that can procreate. Thalidomide introduced the necessity to report safety in an objective and unbiased way, so that the pharmaceutical company itself has very little power in saying if something is safe or not. The judgment is always upon the physician, and the assessment, although the pharmaceutical company conducts their own assessments, the final assessment on the safety of anything rests on the authority that approves the drug, which in the US is the FDA.
People obviously have raised concerns that a lot of studies are funded by pharmaceutical companies.
Right, and that was also an issue. So in the 70s, there was an 80s, there was a boom of pharmaceutical development. A lot of new drugs were launched on the market, and the money became very large. People were encouraged through gifts and monetary advantages to prescribe certain medicines over others. So that led to a big change, and pharmaceutical medicine in Europe and in the UK specifically is guided by the Code of Conduct. When I started working for the pharmaceutical industry, everybody was talking about luscious meals and kind of $900 wine bottles getting exchanged, cruise ships for friends and families. When I started working in the pharmaceutical industry, we didn't have any of that. It was already not possible for us to either sponsor anyone without full accountability, give or receive any kind of gifts. 2010 in the US, first of all, there was like an Anti-Corruption Act that was passed and applies broadly to corporations. And then there was this Sunshine Act. Now, any exchange of money between health-related corporations and institutions, healthcare professionals, need to be documented very clearly. Everything is accounted for. Every sponsorship needs to be declared, and the maximum amount of money is to be released. I used to go to dermatology congresses, and I used to go back home with bags and bags of samples. This was in my 20s, so we're talking about the early 90s, right? We used to go back home with bags and bags of samples. And then I started going to conferences where there was nothing. It was like pens or notepads. Now I work what's called medical affairs. So I'm a medical representative, and I interact with healthcare providers and institutions. And there is no one penny that isn't accounted for.
So it's very difficult now for graft to influence
Right.
the way the medical establishment approves things.
I mean, one thing that you can do, everybody can do, you can actually go online. There is a public registry now that is available to everybody. And you can type the name of your doctor, and you can see who's giving them grants, if they're receiving money from any pharmaceutical company, and how much money they're receiving. It's all that transparent.